So, when you're a therapist, you get asked really quite often about what is the secret to good, long lasting mental health? So, is there some kind of a secret technique that will just improve things essentially forever going forwards? And the answer to that is essentially yes and no. So, no, in terms of there isn't one single response that we can apply to anything, no matter what the situation, that will help everyone. But there is one overall practice that I would really highly recommend to anyone watching this video, and that is the importance of having space to reflect. So there is a lot of psychological evidence out there that essentially suggests that those who have more space to reflect, whether that's journaling, whether that's checking in with yourself, whether that's having almost like a debrief with someone on a regular basis, those kinds of people have better mental health in the long run. And why is that? Well, there's a few reasons for that. Number one is that it can help us to detect early warning signs of if things aren't going in a good direction. Number two is it helps us to essentially increase our vocabulary, increase our awareness of ourselves as a person. And also, the final one that I feel is involved in this process is that it helps to essentially get us to reflect on our perceptions and our thought processes about how we feel about things or what's going through our mind in any given moment, and getting a chance to either normalize that or challenge that perspective. So, why is reflective time so important? Well, if you think about how modern life tends to go, we're essentially in perpetual motion. We're always moving on from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. So many different things are competing for our attention, whether that's social media, whether that's our work, whether that's our responsibilities as a parent. All of these different kinds of factors are all competing for our attention all the time. And what that means is if we have a particular thought about something, like something is triggering for us, or something makes us feel anxious, something makes us feel low, we don't get the chance to stop and pause and reflect on that and digest it. We're just constantly moving forwards. And one of the downsides of that is there is a really high rate of burnout across society, wherever you are in the world at the moment. And that's partly caused by constantly being in motion. And there are trends of taking breaks from our phone, breaks from social media, things like that. I think a lot of people refer to it as almost like a phone detox in a way. And that's the feeling that these kinds of things have on us, is it feels like it almost is toxic, and we do need to have that space to step away from stuff and digest things a little bit more. And when we step away and digest things, we start to notice more about ourselves. So one of the really common problems that a lot of people have when they come to therapy or come to mental health services is they know they aren't feeling good, but they don't really fully understand what it is that they're necessarily trying to describe, or what it is that they're feeling. So quite often people might say, I feel like panic attacks just come on out of nowhere. And in reality, it's very rare that they actually do come on out of nowhere. More often than not, there are early warning signs, but we may be on the go so much that we're just not picking up on those early warning signs. We're just go, and then we crash. Same with motivation problems as well. There's usually early warning signs. We usually start to feel a bit tired or a little bit foggy or things like that leading up to that. But if we don't catch those early warning signs, we end up crashing. So the technical term for this is alexithymia, which is essentially the inability to describe our own emotions. And if we can't detect our own emotions, if we can't detect those signs that we're either feeling emotionally or maybe even physically, then that puts us in danger, whether that's a danger of crashing and feeling like we're caught off guard and feeling really out of control with all of these kinds of symptoms that we might be noticing. It may also mean that we lack a certain level of intuition as well. So if, let's say, we get one of those classic, phone calls from a scammer, and we can't identify that we feel like something's wrong about this, then chances are we're going to be in more danger of actually being scammed, for example. Whereas someone who has more of an awareness of their emotions as a general rule, may listen to their gut a little bit more. They may go, "Ooh, this phone call doesn't quite sound right," or like there's something fishy about this, but I can't quite put my finger on it. But either way, thanks, but no thanks, and hang up. So if we're lacking that sense of awareness of our emotions and our ability to describe what those emotions are and label those emotions, which we can develop through generic reflective practices, then we're at more risk of putting ourselves in more danger or losing opportunities as well. So intuition is both a good thing and a bad. It can work in positive and negative ways in terms of it can protect you from danger. It can also help you to grab an opportunity when an opportunity arises as well. So reflective practices, like I said, whether that's through journaling, debrief with someone, checking in with yourself, all of these things, they can really, really help us to detect those early warning signs. If this is an area that you wanted to focus on, what I would really suggest that you do is look up on Google or whatever search engine you might use, maybe something like symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of depression, symptoms of whatever emotion it is that you might feel. And you might be able to find a list of what would that mean physically? If I'm feeling this way, what kind of physical feelings are associated with that? It might be what kind of thoughts might be going through my mind if I was feeling that way. It might be, how does that emotion feel? How do people describe that emotion generally? Do I relate to how they describe that emotion? Again, there's nothing bad with feeling like you just want to check in on these things as well. It's a really important skill in life that quite often people don't develop through the way life currently works. So quite a lot of early therapy for a lot of people can be simply learning to label those emotions through reflective practices. If you wanted to do something a little bit more formal with this to increase your awareness of your emotions, it may be something down the lines of set an alarm 2-3 times a day, every day, and make it times where you're going to be doing different things. Like one day you might be at work, the next day you might be seeing your friends, something like that. And whenever that alarm goes off, just try and describe your emotions in as much detail in that moment as you can. So, again, don't need to do this out loud or anything like that, but just a little practice that you can do on a personal level. If you wanted something more specific than that, maybe describe your emotions in 3 words. So, 1 word, anyone can describe themselves in 1 word. 2 words is a little bit tricky. 3 words starts to get you to need to work for it to reach 3 words. That's why I'm suggesting 3 words. Even me as a psychologist who's been working in this field for a long time, I might struggle any moment of any day to describe myself or my emotions in 3 words. So it shouldn't feel impossible, should feel tricky, but it gets you to become a little bit more aware of things. And again, this skill is going to serve you no matter what you do in every area of your life, because it's going to help you to build that intuition, that ability to detect those early warning signs in yourself. The other side of it is around our perceptions. So this is something I will definitely expand on in future videos, but we quite often just accept whatever thoughts go through our mind as essentially being gospel in many ways. So if we're anxious about something, we assume it has to be the case. It has to be something to be anxious about. It may be if something bothers us. So let's say we make a mistake at work and we convince ourselves we're always making mistakes all day, every day. We just kind of accept it as gospel. We don't really challenge our own thoughts as they come up into our mind. And for some of us, we may even be quite fused to our thoughts. We might really struggle to see things from a different perspective. So, I might see myself as not very good at something. Someone else might see me as great. And I really struggle to accept that they might see me as better than how I see myself, for example. Or to give you another example here, with people who've gone through trauma, no matter what that trauma is, there's usually a really strong theme of self-blame. So, it's my fault that this happened, even when 99% of the time it's absolutely not that person's fault. They might really struggle to see it from someone else's perspective. So all of their friends, all of their family are saying it's absolutely not your fault, but they just can't shift that feeling because they might be quite fused to their own thoughts. They might struggle to challenge their own thoughts and break their own thoughts down. Now, learning to challenge and break down those thoughts is a skill in and of itself, which could be a 2-hour long video in and of itself, to be honest. But For now, it may just be useful to notice those thoughts and just try and check in with yourself. Like, is this true? Is this not true? If I'm anxious about something, is this accurate? Um, I can't remember the reference off the top of my head, but when I did some anxiety training a while ago, one of the statistics that was thrown out in that training was actually, if you sit down and measure it, 97% of the things that people tend to worry about never happen on average. So that really says a lot, I think. Whether or not we believe or don't quite believe that figure in itself, just knowing that actually, whatever that exact number might be, the vast majority of things that we might worry about may never happen. I think that's quite a powerful thing to think about there. So, reflecting on how we feel about things, there is actually a technique that we quite often use for people who have anxiety problems, which is called worry time, or controlled worry, which, again, I will do a future video where we go into that technique in depth as a whole video in and of itself. But the general idea of this is that you would log down the kinds of things that bother you throughout the day. So whenever you're worried about something, whenever something bothers you, just make a quick note of that in a notebook or on your phone or something like that. And then have a scheduled time that you can come back to later in the day where you can essentially look back at that thing and just check in with yourself. Like, that thing felt like it was really real at the time. How does it feel now? Now that you're in a different frame of mind, do you still believe that thought as much as you did then? It felt really real then. Sometimes, quite often in these scenarios, you may find it feels a bit silly now that you're looking back at it. Or it may be you're really worried about it and now the problem's resolved and you know it was okay, or things like that. So having that space to reflect, even if it's unstructured, can be a really useful time just to check in with yourself. And if you do that, then it may make you less sensitive to those things going forwards. If you're noticing that actually I'm worried about all of these things, but whenever I do this, let's call it worry time, but this reflective time, I keep coming back to it and all of these things I'm worrying about are never happening. That's a really good way of lowering your overall sensitivity to being anxious about those things over the course of a few weeks or even a few months. Also, if you do start to worry about something and unfortunately the worst thing does happen, then that lets you know you can trust your intuition as well. So was there something different about how that one felt compared to all the things that didn't happen? Is there something that went through your mind or something in how it presented itself that you can latch onto for the future that's going to help you to develop this early warning system or this kind of radar that you can use that's going to be more accurate and it's going to help you to navigate life? So reflective times, reflective periods can be really, really, really helpful. It's also really important with this when it comes to digesting strong emotional aspects of life. So if you've gone through a major life event, whether that's a breakup, losing your job, or anything like that, maybe grief, for example, journaling and just getting your feelings down on paper, out of your head, can be really, really, really helpful as part of that. Now, there are reams and reams and reams of texts about how you can do this, what's the right way, what's the wrong way. Generally speaking, I would say don't worry about that too much at this stage. If you are going through something, just if you feel like it's going to be a helpful part of that process, just journal, free flow, whether it's note form, whether you write it as like a letter, whether you write it as almost like a diary entry, it doesn't matter. Just getting those thoughts out onto paper. I would definitely recommend typing it or writing it because that will make your brain process it more richly. It will help you to digest it better. But whatever you feel like you need to get out, get it out. It may help you to come to some conclusions with that. Now, when it comes to reflective time, it is a very, very, very useful technique. It's one of the main things I would recommend, regardless of what kind of problems you're going into, whether you are actively trying to improve your mental health or whether it's just maintaining good mental health going forwards. I would definitely recommend this as a practice, using these rough guidelines I've described so far. But there is one major exception to reflective time, or something that may feel like a reflective time, that I would definitely suggest that you keep an eye out for. And this is when you may be doing something called rumination. So rumination is a process that essentially it was originally used in terms of animals, and then psychology kind of grabbed it because it's a really useful way of describing something. So if you think of animals like cows, things that eat grass essentially as their main form of food, grass isn't full of nutrition, or it doesn't really have very much. So in order to rain out as much of that nutrition from the grass as possible, what cows, and I believe sheep as well, tend to do is they will essentially eat the grass the first time round, digest it partially, and then they will essentially regurgitate it, chew it over, and then swallow it back down, digest it a second time. And essentially, this process goes on several times before essentially it eventually comes out the other side of the cow. And this is a really useful way of looking at essentially processes where we might be beating ourselves up over things that may have happened in the past, whether we have made a mistake and we do feel a lot of shame about that potentially, or maybe that one time in school where we made an absolute idiot out of ourselves in public and our brain just casually likes to remind us of that time that we really embarrassed ourselves all the time. And if you feel like you're going through these processes and you're just feeling bad for it, like you're not gaining anything productive from it, not all reflection is going to feel great. But if you feel like it's not giving you some useful thing to move on with, if it just feels like you're just beating yourself up or essentially almost bullying yourself by doing this, then the chances are what you're experiencing may be something like rumination. If you are experiencing rumination and you feel like it's just making you worse, my advice would be to essentially try and stop and interrupt that process. There are other techniques. I'll try and make my next video around how to challenge thoughts and break thoughts down so that you've got a resource around how to deal with rumination in a different way. But for now, the best way of dealing with that is to refocus and just interrupt that process. You can do this through a variety of different ways. Essentially, all you're aiming to do is do something else that's going to flood your attention span with something enough that you don't have enough attention span left over to also be thinking about that thing that's bothering you. So it doesn't need to be anything too advanced. It could be going and making yourself a drink for a few moments. It could be going on a walk. It could be having a conversation with someone. It could be anything that comes to mind that's just going to use up your attention for a few moments and snap you out of that moment, essentially. If these don't work, or you've tried them and the thought keeps coming back, then another way that you can do this is through a counted breathing exercise. This is something that I quite often recommend to people. It usually works for most people if they're struggling with rumination. And the way that you do this is you just have slow breaths in and out. As you're breathing in, you would count up to a number, hold for a certain number, and then breathe out for a certain number. You do that on a loop for as long as you feel like you need to. So the usual ratio of numbers I suggest to people is 5 to 7. So in for 5, it shouldn't feel like it's an uncomfortable breath in, hopefully. If it does, reduce that number a little bit. So you can breathe in for 4, you can breathe in for 3, especially if you do have any kind of like a breathing disorder. Hold for 2. So you're only holding for a very brief pause. You're not holding your breath. Some resources online, if you've ever heard of this technique before, they may suggest hold your breath for a count of 10 or something like that. You don't want to do that. That's just going to stress your body out. That's going to feed into the problem. It's not going to actually relieve the problem. So in for 5, maybe slightly less. Hold for 2, so only a brief pause, and then out for slightly longer than you're breathing in. So if you're breathing in for 5, I usually suggest breathing out for 7. If you're breathing in for 4, breathe out for 6. If you're breathing in for 3, breathe out for 4 or 5, just because the proportion of counting 2 more may feel like it's a little bit too much of an out breath at that point. The reason you breathe out for slightly more than you breathe in is if we're stressed, we tend to use lots of short, sharp breaths, which just uses essentially like the top third of our lungs. And what that can mean is we get a buildup of carbon dioxide in the lower parts of our lungs, which may make us feel quite breathless. And it might make us feel like we need to breathe harder or faster. And it can feed into that overall sense of stress that our body might be going through. If we just make sure that we're breathing out for slightly longer than we're breathing in, just make sure we clear that carbon dioxide buildup that could happen, and then it should start to feel like it has more of a calming effect on you, as well as essentially putting your mind off of what's going through your mind at the moment. So it fights the stress response, The other thing is, by stopping and starting counting on that loop, it's a really good way of keeping your attention span occupied so you can't also think about the other stuff. If I were to just tell you to count up to 100, it might hold your attention up until you get to about 10, and then you'll start to be able to get to the point where you can kind of still count, but your mind is drifting off elsewhere. We don't want to do that. So stopping and starting it, keep refreshing that process is essentially what we're doing. It's a really good way of holding your attention on that thing. If that doesn't work for you, you can do an alternative, which is a word game. So I tend not to recommend this as much anymore, but some people really do get on well with it. The idea of the word game is you just pick something around you. So for me, I've got my pen on my desk in front of me. So I might start off with pen. Then I want to move on to a second word where the first letter of the second word is the last letter of the first word. So with pen, I then might go for navy, for example. And then from navy, I might go on to yellow, and so on and so on and so on. So doing that can also be a different way of refocusing your mind away from it. If you do this and it feels like it works for a moment and then the rumination comes back afterwards, that's okay. Just keep doing this cycle until the rumination goes away. It should go away eventually. It's just, if we're in a cycle where we're ruminating a lot, our brain will want to do that automatically. It will make it easier for itself to do it automatically. If we consistently interrupt that process over time, our brain will essentially rewire itself to be less inclined to do it on an automatic basis. So if it's something you struggle with, just try and be consistent. I know it can be frustrating, but it can be really, really useful to just keep interrupting that process whenever it comes up. If you're someone who chronically worries about things, you can also use this process to help you to manage worry. I wouldn't recommend it as a long-term solution for worry, just because suppressing worry can lead to a bit of a pressure buildup that can essentially kind of explode out in our mind eventually. But as a short-term solution, you can use it to manage worry. Again, future videos, I will go into worry in a lot more depth and give you a full kind of toolkit over time around how to manage that. So, moral of the story for today's video is essentially having time to reflect is probably the number one thing as an experienced therapist that I would recommend anyone does. Doesn't need to be structured, although if you do know any structured elements like thought challenging, which we'll go through in a future video, that's absolutely fine. Introduce those. Anything that feels like it's a useful part of that process, chuck it in, that's fine. But it doesn't need to be structured. You may even want to vary how you do it so that you're getting different forms of feedback each time. So you may want to have a debrief with someone where you check in with a friend or a family member. You may want to do journaling. You may want to just have a sit down with yourself with a drink or something like that and just have a bit of a think about like how things are going. But just think about, how are you feeling, labeling your emotions, what's going through your mind, is there anything bothering you, are those thoughts accurate, or is there a way that they could be reframed potentially? So prompt questions that may help you with that if you're finding that hard is, if I were to describe this to a friend, would they agree with me? So I see myself as I'm just making mistakes all the time and I'm a bit useless or things like that. Just example off the top of my head. If I were to say this to my partner or my best friend or something like that, would they agree with that? Or would they say, maybe I'm being a bit biased right now or something like that? It might be any kind of things that bother us anxiety-wise, like, are those things accurate? Did the bad thing really happen? Or was it not as bad as I thought it was? All of those kinds of factors. And then you can also use it to help you to digest emotional trauma as well, which at the moment I would suggest just going through it in an unscripted way, whatever you feel works for you, as long as writing it or typing it out so that your brain processes it a bit more richly, whatever you feel is going to work for you can help. We will do future videos on how to break that kind of stuff down in a bit more detail, because there's a lot of extra stuff that you could introduce, like thought challenging, belief work, shadow work, which is quite popular on social media at the moment, all of these kinds of things. So hopefully that gives you something to work with there. Maybe try it once a week, maybe try it a couple of times a week, see how you feel about it. Thanks, and I will aim to upload a little bit more regularly going forwards. Unfortunately, after uploading my first video, I caught, let's just call it a seasonal flu that's been around since 2020. So, so yeah, it threw me off my stride a little bit, but hopefully uploads should be a bit more regular from now on. Thanks and bye.